Imagine a classic scene from any Hollywood action movie. The main character bursts into the villain's lair, takes a couple of bullets to the chest, falls theatrically, and then, to the enemy's amazement, unbuttons his shirt to reveal a completely intact bulletproof vest. A sigh of relief, a reload, and the action continues. We are so used to this cinematic cliché that we take lightweight concealable armor for granted. But what if I told you that this material was not created because the military or the police ordered a super shield to protect their lives? What if all this is merely a side effect of an attempt to save a couple of gallons of gas on trips to the supermarket? And what if the material, which is 5 times stronger than steel, originally looked like spoiled, cloudy milk that lab technicians refused to test for fear of breaking their equipment? Today we are going to talk about polyparaphenylene terephthalamide, or, as you know it, Kevlar. This is the story of how the stubbornness of one chemist, the paranoia of an entire corporation, and the madness of a pizza delivery guy forever changed the rules of human survival. The year is 1964. The world does not yet know the oil embargo of the 70s, nor the lines at gas stations, but the analysts of the giant chemical corporation E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company, or simply DuPont, are already looking anxiously into the future. They see that gasoline consumption is growing, cars are getting heavier, and sooner or later, the world will catch the scent of a fuel crisis. The business logic of that time was extremely pragmatic. If gasoline becomes more expensive, people will need lightweight cars. And what makes a car heavy? Besides the body, it is the heavy tires with steel cord inside. Steel cord makes the tire strong and prevents it from tearing at high speeds. But steel means an enormous amount of excess weight. DuPont's management sets a clear task for its pioneering research laboratory in Wilmington, Delaware. We need a new material. It must be as strong as steel, but as light as nylon, to replace metal in automobile tires and earn the corporation hundreds of millions of dollars in the auto industry. Stephanie Kwolek, a 41-year-old research chemist, takes on this task. Again, forget the romantic myths about genius scientists who, under the cover of night in a garage, illuminated by a lightning strike, create masterpieces. Kwolek was an employee in a corporate machine. She had a salary, a budget, and a specific technical assignment: to find new, ultra-rigid polymers. Stephanie begins experimenting with polyamides. In very simple terms, polymers are long chains of molecules. In ordinary materials, like that same nylon, these chains are tangled together like boiled spaghetti on a plate. When you pull nylon, this spaghetti untangles first, the material stretches, and only then does it break. That is exactly why nylon is elastic. But DuPont did not need elasticity. They needed rigidity. Kwolek was looking for a way to make the molecules line up perfectly straight, like raw pasta in a box. If you pull on such an aligned box, you have to break not a tangle, but the incredibly strong chemical bonds themselves. In 1965, after months of routine and hundreds of experiments, Kwolek synthesizes a solution of a new polymer. And this is where things don't go according to plan. Usually, polymer solutions for spinning fibers, like nylon, are clear, thick, viscous substances resembling honey. But what Kwolek ended up with looked disgusting. It was a cloudy, opaque, liquid substance, more reminiscent of sour milk or buttermilk in consistency. Kwolek takes this sludge and brings it to the spinning machine operator, Charles Smullen. Smullen's job is to run the liquid through a spinneret, a device with microscopic holes, similar to a shower head, to produce threads on the way out. Smullen looks at this milk and gives a categorical no. He is convinced that the solution contains undissolved particles that will permanently clog the extremely expensive spinneret, and the machine will have to be stopped and cleaned. Any less stubborn employee would have simply poured this solution down the drain and started over so as not to anger their colleagues. But Stephanie Kwolek was adamant. She literally forced Smullen to run the machine. The operator, grumbling and expecting equipment failure, presses the button. And a thread begins to emerge from the spinneret. It does not break. The equipment does not clog. When the resulting fiber was taken to the laboratory for tensile testing, the technicians thought their instruments were broken. The instruments showed numbers that simply could not exist. The fiber was 5 times stronger than a steel thread of the same weight. It did not burn, did not melt, and practically did not stretch. Kwolek had accidentally stumbled upon the state of so-called liquid crystal polymers. In this solution, the molecules were already lined up in those perfectly straight ranks, and when this liquid was forced through the holes, the molecules locked together dead tight. In 1971, realizing what kind of genie they had let out of the bottle, DuPont patents this material under the trademark Kevlar. A triumph? An innovation? Not quite. In the world of big money, inventing a material is not even half the battle. It's maybe 10%. Producing Kevlar in a test tube is one thing, but making it roll off the assembly line by the ton turned out to be a technological hell. The solvent Kwolek used, hexamethylphosphoramide, proved to be toxic and caused cancer in laboratory animals. It was impossible to produce the material with it on an industrial scale. It took DuPont a long 6 years and colossal budgets for engineer Herbert Blades to come up with a safe method of so-called wet spinning with an air gap. Just developing the equipment, building new facilities, and scaling up production cost the corporation an astronomical sum for those times. Over $500 million. Just think about it. $500 million in early 70s prices were invested in a material that was not yet being sold on the market. But DuPont had a plan. They remembered their original goal, automobile tires. And it seemed their analysts turned out to be geniuses. In 1973, the oil crisis hit. Gasoline prices skyrocketed into space, automakers panicked, and the demand for fuel economy became colossal. But there was one nuance. Kevlar turned out to be incredibly expensive. Yes, it made tires lighter, but the cost of these tires was such that the average American looked at the price tag and decided it was simply cheaper to overpay for gas. The automotive industry eventually switched to a new generation of steel cord. It was heavier, but exponentially cheaper. And so DuPont's board of directors finds itself in an interesting position. They have a miracle material into which $500 million has been pumped. Giant factories have been built, and the main client, the auto industry, says, "Thanks, but no thanks." They urgently needed to find a new application for Kevlar, otherwise the grandiose project threatened to turn into a financial catastrophe. They started trying to apply the material wherever strength and lightness were needed. Cables for suspension bridges, airplane parts, sports equipment. But the real, fateful turn in the history of Kevlar occurs in another field. And here, the U.S. National Institute of Justice, NIJ, enters the stage. In the early 70s, there was a huge problem with police safety in America. The crime rate was rising, and criminals had a lot of weapons on their hands. Police officers, of course, had bulletproof vests, but just imagine what they looked like back then. They were bulky, heavy contraptions made of nylon reinforced with thick steel or ceramic plates. Such a turtle shell weighed up to 10 to 15 kilograms. Wearing it every day in a patrol car during the summer was physically unbearable. Because of this, police officers simply didn't wear them. They left them in their trunks just in case. And when a sudden shootout occurred, it was too late to get the vest out. The NIJ begins looking for ways to create armor that a police officer could wear all day under a shirt without dying of heat stroke. They find out about DuPont's new material, which is stronger than steel, but is woven like fabric. In 1971, government laboratories begin the first tests with Kevlar. The principle behind Kevlar armor turned out to be genius in its simplicity. While a bullet simply crashes into a steel plate and flattens or pierces it, Kevlar works like a soccer net catching a ball. When a bullet hits Kevlar fabric, the incredibly strong fibers do not let it push them apart. The threads absorb and dissipate the kinetic energy of the bullet across the entire area of the vest. The bullet gets bogged down in the layers of fabric like a fly in a spider web, losing its speed, and ultimately stops without penetrating the body. In 1975, the NIJ conducts a massive field test. They purchase 5,000 Kevlar vests and distribute them to patrolmen in 15 U.S. cities. In the very first year, this armor saves the lives of several dozen officers. DuPont realizes, this is it. It smelled like big government contracts, but for the innovation to truly reach the masses, dry government tests were not enough. Marketing was needed. Gritty, insane American marketing. And here the story takes an elegant turn. Meet Richard Davis, a former Marine who in the late 60s worked as a regular pizza delivery guy in Detroit. In 1969, during a delivery, he is attacked by robbers. A shootout ensues. Davis is wounded, but survives. Lying in the hospital, he realizes that the world is a cruel place, and if you want to deliver pizza in one piece, you need protection. Davis founds the company Second Chance Body Armor. At first, he tries to make concealable vests out of dense ballistic nylon, but they turn out too thick and uncomfortable. And as soon as Kevlar hits the market, Davis realizes that this is his golden ticket. He buys the fabric and sews a lightweight, fully concealable bulletproof vest, the Model Y. But how do you prove to skeptical police officers that this thin rag will actually stop a bullet? Davis resolves the issue radically. In 1972, he grabs a camera, gathers an audience, puts his vest on under his shirt, takes a .38 caliber revolver, points it at his own chest, and pulls the trigger. A shot. Davis recoils from the impact, winces in pain, because the kinetic energy breaking ribs hasn't gone anywhere, but then lifts his shirt and shows that the bullet is stuck in the Kevlar. No blood. He is alive. And just think about the scale of this madness. Over the following years, Richard Davis would shoot himself almost 200 times at various police presentations and exhibitions across the country. It was the best advertisement in history. Sales skyrocketed into space. Kevlar bulletproof vests became the standard for law enforcement agencies all over the world. From that moment on, the phrase Kevlar vest was permanently cemented into pop culture. For the DuPont company, this was an unconditional victory. The investments paid off handsomely. Kevlar began to be used everywhere. In NASA's space program, in Mars rovers and spacesuits, in fiber optic cables laid along the ocean floor. The Kevlar braiding protects the fragile glass from snapping. In firefighter suits, in airplane fuselages, and even in the speakers of your smartphones. It would seem like the perfect material, an absolute monopoly. But, as we already know from stories about giant corporations, where there are huge profits, competitors with good lawyers always appear. Already in the 70s, the Dutch chemical company Akzo Nobel develops its own analog of aramid fiber, the class to which Kevlar belongs, and calls it Twaron. Essentially, it was the exact same material. The Dutch simply used a slightly different solvent in the production process. And thus began one of the fiercest patent wars of the late 20th century. DuPont, having invested billions in development, sues Akzo Nobel for theft of intellectual property. The Dutch, in turn, claim that DuPont's method is not unique. The lawsuits dragged on for over 10 years, flowing from one jurisdiction to another, blocking the sales of materials in different countries. Finally, in 1989, tired of endless legal fees, the corporations reached a settlement agreement. Akzo received a license to produce Twaron by paying DuPont substantial compensation. Thus ended the Kevlar monopoly, and its chemical twin brothers appeared on the market. And, to sum up this grandiose story, let's look at it from a philosophical perspective. Kevlar is often called an invulnerable material. It stops bullets, withstands extreme temperatures, and cannot be cut with a knife. But this superhero from the polymer world has its own kryptonite weakness, and that weakness is sunlight and water. The fact is that ultraviolet radiation slowly but surely destroys those perfectly aligned polymer chains discovered by Stephanie Kwolek. And ordinary water acts as a lubricant, allowing the fibers to slide apart, which is why a wet Kevlar vest loses up to 20% of its ballistic properties. That is exactly why you will never see pure Kevlar on the outside. It is always hidden, covered with protective nylon cases, cast in resin in composite materials, or isolated inside cable braiding. The strongest material in the world can only do its job if it is carefully protected from ordinary rainwater and the sun. The wheel of samsara has made another turn. In attempting to create a lightweight tire for automobiles, the DuPont Corporation gave the world protection that has saved at least hundreds of thousands of lives of police officers and soldiers across the planet. Today, Kevlar is already being replaced by new, even more advanced materials. Ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, such as Dyneema, which is lighter and unafraid of water, while laboratories are struggling over graphene. But every time you see in a movie how a hero survives after a point-blank shot, just remember that it all started in 1965, when one stubborn chemist refused to pour down the drain a cloudy liquid that looked like sour milk.